Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to the TAG International Business Society's event on mobility. I think we have a great panel here today, and I am the chair of the society, and we're excited to have you. Unfortunately, this is only our second event of the year due to a few COVID issues, but we'll have a few more events coming up in the rest of the year, which we hope you'll be able to join us for. So, as I said, I'm the chair, Mark Borelli. A couple of our board members are on this call, and being the moderator for this event today is Luke Fleming, also one of the board members. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Luke to take it off and run with it. Luke.
Thanks, Mark. So as Mark said, my name is Luke Fleming. I work for DealerTrack, Cox Automotive Company. And today I have the pleasure to introduce and moderate a wonderful and accomplished panel of experts in the autonomous vehicle space. Our panel today will consist of Tal Cohen. Tal Cohen is a serial entrepreneur, an investor, and a former adjunct professor at Georgia Tech. He's focused on new venture creation, commercialization, and lean startup methodologies. He's the founding partner of Drive, an Israeli smart mobility innovation center, co-founder and former head of ClickFox, Inc., a global market leader in customer behavior intelligence software and services to the Fortune 1000. The founder and managing director of My Seed Tech Fund, which invests in early stage startups in the US and Israel, and the founding partner of Next Year Ventures, a fund that invests in mobility and energy related startups. Also on our panel, we have Dan Gordon. Dan Gordon is the lead executive for Javian Consulting's flagship office in Atlanta, Georgia. He leads a highly skilled team of management and technology consultants. Prior to joining Javian, Dan held a number of senior level roles within Home Depot and the investment arm of Arthur Blank's family office. He has also served as chief of staff for the president of Emory University and as chief operating officer for the city of Atlanta. Dan is an active member of the community and has served on numerous boards and committees, such as Leadership Atlanta, as chair of the board for Super Bowl 53, and as a board member for Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. He was the ELC chair. Also, we have Eric Tannenblatt. Eric Tannenblatt is the global chair of public policy and regulations at Dentons, the world's largest law firm, where he leads the firm's US public policy and global autonomous vehicle practices. He has served in the administrations of 3 US presidents and is a senior advisor to a US senator and governor. He's a prominent advocate for civic engagement, a renowned lecturer and political counselor. He currently serves on the board of directors of Points of Light. Lonnie Russell joins us as well. Lonnie is the manager for product strategy at Mercedes-Benz USA, where he oversees product management efforts for portfolio planning, electric vehicle transformation, market research, CO2 strategy, telematics, infotainment, and autonomous driving for the US market. Ali Kelly. Ali Kelly is an executive director at The Ray, which has developed an 18-mile stretch of interstate in Georgia, where they're using renewable materials, testing road connectivity, improved lighting and signage, and collecting traffic, weather, collision, and pollution data to make the roads of the future. Working with GDOT and FHWA, Ali has guided more than a dozen projects from concept to construction on the Ray Highway. The nonprofit organization is now working with more than 20 agencies in 14 states, scaling innovations from the I-85 testbed across the country. Following in the legacy of Ray Anderson, the Ray believes that the technologies exist to make transportation zero deaths, zero carbon, and zero waste. Previously, Ali held senior roles at the Georgia Conservancy and is a founder and executive director at Georgia Watch. Rounding out our panel, we have Jim Hefner. Jim Hefner is an associate vice president at Cox Automotive, where he's focused on the future of mobility, helping Cox and its clients understand the implications of an autonomous, connected, electric, and shared future, and capitalize on market trends in order to solidify their position in an evolving automotive ecosystem. Our questions today are intended to be broad and focused on automotive autonomous vehicles, but this is an evolving space, and our panelists are free to answer questions as they please. One caveat before we get started, The views expressed are our own and those of the panelists and don't necessarily constitute the official position of their respective employers. I'm sure you're as excited as I am to jump into the discussion, but before doing so, I'd like to remind our audience that you've been muted for this discussion. If you have any questions for our panelists, we ask that you type them in the chat. We'll take a few of your questions at the end. And with that, let's get started. So it seems to me that vehicle autonomy, the idea that automotive vehicles can drive themselves with little to no human intervention, can exist along a continuum. If you agree, what should we think of when we hear CEOs, journalists, academics, and prognosticators say the future involves autonomy? Jim, is that something you'd like to field?
Sure. Thank you, Luke. It's a great question. And I would say, when I hear that question, the very first thing I think of is perspective and context. Fully recognizing where we are today and what is needed to get from where we are today to where we'll need to be in the future. And the reality is that we're starting to get capabilities that are close to level 3 autonomy or L3 autonomy, but we're still a great deal of ways away from it. We have ADAS or advanced driving assistance capabilities that are evolving, but they can manage all safety critical functions under certain conditions, and it's still very much reliant on a driver to take over when alerted. And so when I think about getting to what the future involves in autonomy at a future state, yes, it will be possible. It'll be fully autonomous when we also have full connectivity, where the car is completely capable of self-driving in every situation, and those vehicles will be safer. They'll be electrified, so they'll certainly be cleaner, more environmentally friendly, but they'll mostly be integrated, allowing for seamless connectivity across the ecosystem. So I believe when I hear people prognosticating about what the future will be, I would ask, take a step back and ask where we really are today. Is it possible? Yes, but we're probably a pretty good ways away from fully autonomous vehicles, and we need to understand the progression path that we need to be on.
Great. Thanks, Jim. Tal, I'm sure you've got a perspective. You see it from a lot of different angles. Thoughts?
Yeah, sure, Luke. Thanks very much. So I think that when we say autonomous, I think that the picture is going to be different as we progress along the years. We can create different autonomous realities, and we will kind of adjust to that as we kind of keep moving forward. We are pretty far away, but we're also close. In the same time, capabilities from AI agents, computing perspective, we're getting there. We start together and we get it quicker and quicker. In the from sensing perspective, we still have a long way to go. And we are in early iteration to get to the, so to speak, to the utopian dream. But even what is the utopian dream of fully autonomous? I don't think it's what we define as level 5 necessarily. I think that, you can imagine a world by which driving or getting from one place to another can be done much quicker, much more effective, in a much more effective way than even we think is autonomous now. So, to answer that in a less philosophical way, we will see autonomous happening relatively quickly in a constrained environment, in a way that is going to allow safety with the basic functionality of autonomous. And then we have a long way to go to develop a utopian view of what is the real autonomous can do for us, in an almost futuristic way. So touching that a little bit.
Great. Any of the other panelists want to jump in? Thoughts?
I'll just add just one point, and we saw some of this during the pandemic, and we're starting to see more and more uses of testing autonomous technology without passengers. So, during COVID, there were autonomous vehicles delivering, pharmaceuticals to elderly patients. I'm sure many of you have seen the Domino's commercial showing the Neuro vehicle delivering pizzas. And, a lot of that is still testing, but you're starting to see more and more vehicles out there without passengers. And then, of course, the vehicle testing that's taking place in, some markets with passengers, like what's going on in Phoenix with, with Waymo, and what Mobileye just announced they're going to be doing in New York City.
So maybe we'll see dogs in the back seat of autonomous vehicles headed to the groomer or doggy daycare before we see people.
Right.
Great.
Luke, can I chime in on this?
Yeah, please, Alec.
Yeah, I would just add, you need only look at state DOTs like Michigan DOT already signed the paperwork and investing in autonomous vehicle infrastructure projects with well-capitalized companies like Cavnew. I'm joining this webinar from the great state of Texas today, and agencies across Texas at the highest levels of leadership, literally the highest levels of leadership, are saying, how can we get infrastructure today to enable connected and autonomous vehicle operation as soon as possible? And, as we see companies, of course, we'll mention Tesla again and again, but as we see the semi rollout, as we see Too Simple make more gains with its technology and other companies coming to the fore, autonomy over the road in the logistics and the medium and heavy duty freight space is going to be a place to watch in the coming years.
Great. No, so I'm hearing we're close, but we're still far away. We'll see some progress in areas, but it'll take longer. Will we know it when it arrives? Will there be a singular point where it arrives, or will it just be a continuum and we sort of blend into this world of autonomy?
Luke, I'll make a quick comment. It's a little more government centric. I think this is a prime opportunity for Atlanta or Georgia, for a leader, just to say, we're going to own this. It happened with an airport. It happened with railroads. We have a history of owning a lot of things based on the leader or the time. And we got a group around the Olympics. We got a group around the Super Bowl. There's a real opportunity here for people to step up and say, we want to really be a part of our future, and we are a logistics hub in the country. And I think we're seeing inklings of that now, but I view this as a really prime moment to slightly catch up or arguably get ahead and really own it. I don't think that's happened yet. I'll share a few remarks later in a later question, speaking to a few state leaders, but I did want to let you know, I think we need to take ownership of that and not just look at it as business folks, and really push our leaders that are in those positions of influence to make Atlanta that and Georgia that leader. And our friends in Texas too, we have an office there, Ali.
Great. Thank you, Dan. So what's needed within and around the vehicle to enable a high degree of vehicle autonomy? So Lonnie, from a Mercedes perspective, you guys obviously see, and you're responsible for product planning for Mercedes. What does the vehicle need to entail to enable that level of autonomy?
Yeah, thanks, Luke. It's really three main categories to enable vehicle autonomy. First, you have the sensors. And we're familiar with the radar and the cameras that are on cars today. And then you get into this new thing called LiDAR. Think of it as high def radar that really lets the car create a 3D representation far away from the car and understand what's going on around the car. You also need to know where the car physically is. So there's these technologies like high def GPS. We'll bring a car that'll have GPS so good, a handful of centimeters, it can tell exactly where you are. It has to take into account continental drift to know exactly where the car is. And also sensors to understand the status of the driver. Are they awake? Are they alert? All these things have to be taken in. That's category one. Category two, you got to compute all this. So in order to take in all these signals and make decisions multiple times per second, there's a tremendous computing power needed in these cars, more than what's in a typical car today. And the last piece, the connectivity side of it. So these vehicles will need to upload and download all these sensor inputs and create a real-time mapping and awareness of the hazards, construction zones, weather events, what's going on in the real world, and then facilitate that communication back and forth to other cars on the road. And it's 4G now, but obviously 5G would be a key enabler for that. And so that's really what's needed in the car. I think that's a great segue to probably what's needed on the infrastructure side. I think somebody else maybe want to take that up.
But before we pass it over, and I think Ali will have some great thoughts there, just for our audience, can you tell them where you're sitting?
I'm gonna, it's faux, it's not a real background. It's a Mercedes EQS, which this car will launch in Germany later this year with level 3 technology. So it's coming.
Great.
to that point. Not a commercial. I'll no more commercials from my standpoint.
No, I just had to give the shameless plug.
Yeah.
Ali, from an infrastructure standpoint in the roads, what is key to enabling sort of a truly autonomous future from your perspective?
Sure. So we think about this from the perspective of meeting the technology and the vehicle halfway. So can the infrastructure meet the vehicle halfway? And what I mean by that is we don't have to make necessarily large investments or incorporate infrastructure that is radically different from the types of infrastructure that DOTs are very accustomed to. Let me give you an example of, one of the basic ingredients, just lane markings that are highly visible in all weather conditions, day, night, that also have machine readability. So on the Ray Highway on 13 of our 18 miles, we have 3M's connected road striping. It's the only lane markings that are available in the United States right now that have proven science and validation of their machine readability aspects. They also just happen to be the highest visibility for human drivers. So we get the safety that we want for our human drivers today, while we're literally paving the infrastructure for higher levels of autonomy and for PS, the utilization of advanced ADAS today. Anyone who's been in a Tesla with autopilot knows that if the vehicles we have today can't read the lines, then they won't make their advanced ADAS functions available. So that's some of the low-hanging fruit, if you will. We also are heavily invested as a partner with GDOT, with Georgia DOT, in creating the connectivity that Lonnie was referring to. We're using the 5.9 gigahertz safety band. We have already installed 6 roadside radios on the Ray Highway. We're ramping up to 13. They're future-proofed and agnostic to the technology. So they are dual mode and dual active, which means they're able to speak in DSRC and cellular V2X all the time. And the point is for us to be able to ingest data streams from connected cars as they are traveling on the Ray Highway, bring that data into a cloud-based and secure data management platform for learning today how at scale in 2024 or 2025, we'll be able to churn meaning and meaningful information out of connected vehicle data at scale. Like Lonnie said, our use cases are interstate, interstate focused, crash detection and crash warning inside the vehicle for the driver to have that heads up alert, either on their user interface or with their heads up device, and to take action. So crash detection and warning, weather impact on driving condition and in-cab warnings, work zone warnings. Right now we can sort of see throughput, but we're preparing for detecting queue in the future when we have some scale of connected vehicles on the road. And then we're also enabling freight priority. So when there are arterials that have signalized intersections, we connect those signalized intersections, and we have the infrastructure prepared for priority. In the less urban, more suburban and rural parts of the state, like we're in LaGrange and West Point, Georgia, we can enable freight priority. But in the urban areas where GDOT has connected, nearly 700 of their signalized intersections, we can enable emergency responders to have preemption at red lights so that they are guaranteed all greens. And then we can get the priority for transit as well as for freight vehicles. Our platform in the cloud for managing big data into meaningful TIMs or traveler information messages that get boomeranged back into the vehicles. That platform has been designed and engineered by Panasonic, which started their connected vehicle data work way back in 2016 with Colorado DOT. And Georgia DOT is now, I would say, in a pole position 1 or 2 alongside Utah DOT and the country for being prepared for connected and autonomous vehicles. I'll wrap up my comments by just saying that, our Cirrus platform is now, Cirrus by Panasonic platform is now regional. So yes, we've got this freight focused connected pilot on the Ray Highway, but now all of those hundreds of connected signalized intersections in the Atlanta area are also pointed to our platform. So we're managing SPAT and map data from the intersections connected in Atlanta, and we are managing information out of connected vehicle data streams for freight movement on our interstate system. And, you know, the big reveal is, you know, companies that are designing platooning systems for advanced freight operations have gone on the record with the FCC saying, yeah, we got to have the 5.9 gigahertz safety band in order to operate in platoon mode. And in the state of Georgia, as Eric knows well, we've got the right regulatory and legal environment to allow autonomous operation and platooning freight operations today. Just a little bit of infrastructure vision and investment goes a long way to meeting the vehicles and meeting that capability halfway with the infrastructure.
That's perfect, Allie. A lot to chew on there. Dan, from your time at the city of Atlanta, how is the city looking at this sort of thing?
Yeah, and these are my individual opinions, as mentioned earlier. So a few things. During my time, this was a particularly high priority. So there's a lot of interesting discussions. One, I resonate very much with what Allie just shared. The signalization is a very important part of this formula, both at the city and at the state level. And using similar equipment, even for MARTA in the city, was part of our discussions, so that the buses could be a part and public transit could be a part of that. If they're not thinking about that through the ARC and through other convening bodies, we'll have a missed inefficiency and possible need to respend taxpayer dollars later. The second piece is we did a study with the traffic lights, and we invested with the state and the city together. And we showed a 30% improvement after major events in our downtown corridor by the stadium when we really do it. So we know it does work. I think that you'll hear me later talk about customer acceptance. I was talking to Georgia Tech in prep for today, and one of their biggest concerns is the ability for the public to not cause more accidents by staring at platooning vehicles or looking at Waymo cars and then all of a sudden getting hit by a car because they weren't paying attention but they were standing on the curb. These are real issues, and the human psychology aspect is actually as important as the technology. And in fact, when countries were being evaluated overseas for competitiveness, that is one of the 4 quadrants that the organization used in considering which countries were ready. It's a matter of customer acceptance of the technology and also how the cities are going to be preparing for those types of support. What I would say is I like the idea of Atlanta's in a good position because we've got a strong Metro Chamber, we've got a strong Atlanta Committee for Progress, we've one of the best GDOT commissioners I've ever seen anywhere, and then we've got good leadership. And I think the city and state on these issues can actually work very well together. And I think that will be exciting to see what happens in November. So in short, I remain optimistic, but I did want to bring up one point. As Ali noted with the frequency, when I was at the city, so this was a few years ago, the ability to get small cell technology rolled out and to be competitive is going to affect where AT&T and Verizon vote. And if it's too hard to get done at the state level or at the city level, or if those economic pieces don't come together, that will put us in an uncompetitive position versus them putting hundreds of millions of dollars into other cities. So we need to be very mindful of being competitive with small cell technology to support the infrastructure of 5G, but especially cars and signals being able to talk together. That's not necessarily where it needs to be fully where we will be in another 5 to 10 years.
Great. Thank you, Dan. So obviously, throughout a lot of what's been stated already today and everything you read in the press, you know, this is all data enabled, right? The ability to have an autonomous future, and it's data coming off the car, it's data from the roads, as Allie was sort of pointing out, from the traffic lights, et cetera. What role will data play in this future? Obviously, it's a big one, and how do we need to sort of be prepared for that from both a sharing of data perspective, but also from a legislative and a data privacy perspective. So I'll put that out there as sort of a jump ball if anyone wants to take that one.
I'll take it first, but I'm actually interested in the panel's point of view as well. I would say it's 100% essential and vital that that the sharing of data occurs across the entire ecosystem. I would say in the conversations with both traditional and new form OEMs, they realize that that not only the data that's generated off the vehicles and through the vehicles out into the world will need to be received with infrastructure and by consumers, but the idea of how that data needs to be democratized, and it needs to be in a language, a common language in which all across the ecosystem can recognize it can understand the translation of it and then fully apply it. There are a tremendous amount of things that need to be considered around standards and certifications and all that, but it ultimately comes down to safety and security. I would love for the rest of the panel, but there's no doubt the manufacturers themselves, as they think about both individual consumer usage and commercial usage from a fleet standpoint, it's at the forefront of how do we make sure that the data that we know we're generating, and it is a tremendous amount of data, is shared in a way that is efficient, is secure, and is safe for all involved. So,
yeah, couldn't agree more. So it's likely a Fed standard that's needed here from that standpoint. But that's going to help us determine performance, because to your point, this only works if these cars are safer than the current vehicles today. We have to really be able to assess that performance. But it goes beyond actually assessing performance. If you think about it, we can use this data on disengagements, near misses, and help facilitate cities and states to proactively invest in infrastructure improvements, determine dangerous intersections, or facilitate, emergency responder actions. There's so much we can do with this, but to your point, it has to be standardized in order to be able to be processed properly.
I think that, if I may jump in, Luke, I think that, data is huge empowerment, and huge empowerment to the regulator, huge empowerment to the city, potentially. I think that it symbolizes the transition from almost platform empowerment to the infrastructure and to the ownership. You can actually do a lot of things with the data. Data is just a manifestation of bytes, but data can provide the infrastructure for a new business model, a new commercial application, and whoever is going to be able to aggregate the data into appropriate business cases can benefit a lot. Piggyback on an example we just discussed before. Why should every vehicle should be equipped with the top sensors, top AI, be very expensive in order to be 100% fully autonomous? If we can do it top down, maybe we can control, maybe in 25 years from now, we can control in a top down perspective. So we can, in the city zone, at least, let the city kind of control the traffic with the infrastructure sensors. So, we don't need expensive vehicles, everyone equipped with it, with top end. And by the way, all the vehicles has to be maintained. If there's an accident or if there is an issue, if there's a software update, so many things can go wrong. So the issue with the data is the life, really, it's the blood stream for the transportation in the future. So it's extremely important on so many levels.
Excellent.
I'll just say we shouldn't ignore the cyber risk that could exist in this environment as well. And also, I'd say, how is, I won't name an auto manufacturer, there's certainly a wonderful one on this call, but I'll make this a general statement, Lonnie. But how are they going to handle requests from lawyers if there's an accident? How are they going to handle, these are some things we were batting around before today. These are great questions. And also, I'm hopeful for cities and states that some of this data, if the government gets involved in being a central place for data, that will create additional money and funding streams to invest in more AV, whether it's 6-inch striping that they're doing in Georgia that recently passed. I'm sure, Ali, you're aware of that, and some of the other things. But if we can monetize that for the government and restrict that funding back into safety on roads and AV, that will only help our cause more. So I think there's a real monetization that Tal kind of touched on, but that intrigues me to replace sensors, because in 5 to 7 years, we have to figure out ways to keep on funding and keep up with these sensors if they don't maintain themselves. Same thing with police cameras, for example.
Yeah, great point, Dan. I think this issue of data needs to be balanced with appropriate privacy protections. And so I think, in any case here, if we can make the car safer, but we still have to provide the customers the privacy protections as well. So we got to find that right balance. That's likely done through anonymization of the data. Ideally, we'll see. All right, but I think into the cybersecurity point, there's ways out there. I mean, the FAA is an example of how they have oversight over commercial aviation in terms of preventing hacking of the planes, if you will. There's likely a pathway there that's sort of the recommendation of the alliance to the DOT to follow that pathway, right? So there's ways we can kind of look to other industries to try to address that risk.
I would also add, Luke, we're building systems as we are learning how to operate and manage and maintain systems. So, I mean, we're literally learning on the job. Having said that, a couple of things, principles we live by at the Ray with GDOT needs to be regional collaboration with data. It needs to be interoperable. The systems need to be interoperable. So we're not developing jurisdictions that you cannot carry forward the benefits of connected and autonomous vehicles from one to the other. We need to have interoperability across jurisdictions. And number 3, security. So what we have done on the Ray and what GDOT is doing in other areas, and take them 1, 2, 3, interoperable. GDOT is working with SigOps to provide a common platform for OEMs who are already with GDOT and OEMs who will no doubt come to the table to be able to see and share in the connected intersection data from the Metro Atlanta area. So that gives us visibility at, congestion and throughput through signalized intersections. So that's a great example of, the regional approach with SigOps. That's between the public and private sector. And then GDOT's already doing great work. I'll brag on them one more time. Bring in Gwinnett County, bring in Cobb County, bring in the ARC. Even bringing the port, right? The Savannah port has connected intersections for freight priority. So, we've got a pathway that GDOT and a couple of other DOTs have proven is possible and is of high value. Number 2, security. Our whole system from end to end is secure. So you got to have a security certificate on the data packet. When it arrives at the roadside radio, it will not be ingested unless it can be validated by the Cirrus by Panasonic system. There are plenty of reputable companies, some we know very well, like BlackBerry, who are in this business, Green Hills. I can tell you, we have cellular V2X connected vehicles as a part of this project. We just announced Kia, Hyundai, and Hachi as a strategic partner. I can tell you that aside from our vehicles that we have retrofitted with C-V2X onboard equipment, we are ingesting connected vehicle data packet from I-85 in LaGrange and West Point, Georgia, that has security certificates attached to the data packets. If that doesn't make you say, wow, I'll try again later in the program. That's really cool. And last but not least, I'm just going to stick on connected vehicles for one more minute because I know other OEMs are using, LTE systems for sharing data with the mothership in order to achieve, diagnostics and operational, updates. But I'm going to talk for one more minute about 5.9 because the data packet's anonymized. And what we're seeing is state DOTs like Oregon looking at a program where you would voluntarily unmask or unanonymize your data for road usage charge purposes. And that's super interesting in the tolling space with traditional turnpike and tollway authorities, but it's also really interesting as we grapple with the future certainty that the gas tax is just not gonna cut it. And if the gas tax is not going to cut it in a CV, AV, EV world, then how are we going to fund transportation? It's increasingly modern transportation infrastructure, right? So we've got to figure out how to fund the maintenance and the operation of increasingly complicated infrastructure. And, the Ray works with Oregon DOT and walking down that, uncharted pathway of unmasking or unanonymizing the connected vehicle data packets in order to see what capability we can refine around connected vehicle data streams being used for road usage charge.
That's great, Ali. And I think, what I'm hearing is at the local level, there seems to be a lot of progress by geography, but at the same time, I'm hearing from Lonnie from an OEM perspective, looking for some level of a federal standard. So I wonder, to you, Ali, or to the panel, right? How do we set manageable sort of shared standards and coordinate activities across both public and private stakeholders to make this incremental progress towards an autonomous future, but do it in a way that has some level of consistency. So those players in the space that need to plan for the entire ecosystem and the larger market can do so effectively.
Well, I'm happy to start. I mean, first, I think we need a common goal. I mean, I think private stakeholders, they have shown that their goal is to produce safe, self-driving vehicles to assist the public. The problem is that we have not seen the level of support that I think is needed at the federal level. And Ali, I completely agree. I think we got a great DOT commissioner. I think there's great innovative things happening in the state of Georgia. And I should also say that we've come a long way because, back in 2015, when our legislature passed a transportation bill, they based future transportation infrastructure on gas tax, which is going away, which was so backwards. And I think it set the state back because people in the whole ecosystem, EV ecosystem, AV ecosystem, looked at what was happening in Georgia and how backwards they were thinking. That's changed, and we're making progress in the state. But back to the federal level, we have a lot of work to do. Right now, we have a patchwork of laws around the country. They're not consistent. Most of them deal with testing. Historically, the federal government has been responsible for regulating the vehicle, and the state, the driver. And we're talking about where the vehicle is the driver. So this is sort of uncharted territory. And the Congress tried 4 years ago, or maybe even longer, to pass a bill. It got past the House. It got stalled in the Senate. They tried again. And I think it was Dan who brought up some of the litigation issues or the privacy issues. I mean, you had the lawyers, the plaintiffs bar, trial lawyers that slowed it down in the Congress, and then we were hit with COVID. There seems to be much more of enthusiasm in Washington, I think, as a result of the current administration's commitment to EVs, because EVs lead to AVs. I think we have a young Secretary of Transportation who I think gets technology. And so I think you'll see the federal Department of Transportation get more involved. You have some senators that, are trying to, get some kind of federal legislation passed, but I think we have a ways to go. But the sooner we can get the federal government engaged, so there's some commonality across the country, I think it's going to help. Because as I said before, right now it's just a patchwork.
I think that safety is extremely important, but it's very tough to define in autonomous world. What is safety? I mean, should you drive 100 million miles? In what scenarios to become safe? And what happens when you change the version of the autonomous agent? You have to test it all 100 million miles again. And how you create uniform between different autonomous agents by different manufacturers? And do you need to test it each time you change sensor configuration? What do you lose? What do you gain? So I mean, all these questions are very tough questions, on theoretical perspective. So I think that technology is here to help the regulator. There are the things that are symbolizing maturity in the autonomous world is by creating startups and technologies like Fortelix, for example, that is coming and giving you a desired goal for safety. How you can actually test for all left turn, and how you test by and bypass in a highway, and so on and so forth. So the infrastructure of regulation going hand in hand with technology innovation, that's what actually going to enable eventually some uniformity in what you define as required. Just one example. Another example is related to the connectivity that we discussed before. I mean, you have to have a certain uptime in connectivity, particularly if you related or trusting it in autonomous driving and delivery. But what happens if it doesn't work for some reason? What happened then? So I mean, you have all sorts of things you have to really make sure are kind of locked to enable it. Okay, and technologies like the Fortelix ones, like the testing and verification infrastructure, like, for example, drive-by-wire, long distance, technologies like Phantom Auto or Utopia that allows you to control vehicles from far away. So, I mean, it's really a combination of enablement of technology that can more maturely help kind of bring the regulator to an ability to say, wow, we are there. Okay.
I did want to say one thing, and Eric, you're of course a good friend personally, but I think you can attest the power of Uber and Lyft to be a part of shaping legislation is real. They're very well entrenched federally and at the local levels, and their model is probably supportive of AV to say the least, right? With some of the investments they've made. And I also think there's an equity position here where some folks in some areas where honestly taxis won't go today very easily, or where elderly or disabled folks don't have the ability to afford a car. There's a lot of equity aspects to this that are very relevant to what gets today's attention, and honestly what's morally right too. So I did want to let you know that the private sector clearly has a role here. And I think that you might see some people not own a car, or they'll own a car and then they will lease it out to drive itself to reduce their monthly payments. I mean, that's been talked about by several dealers as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens, but Uber and Lyft are certainly a part of the equation here.
I know Elon hangs heavy in this space, and I know he's talked about that very model, Dan, with the Tesla taxi concept. So, are there some regions of the world that are more likely to achieve a high degree of vehicle autonomy before others? And if so, where and why? Tal, you've got a good international perspective. Do you see some parts of the world sort of advancing in this space before others?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, China is the first one that pops out. As we discussed, I think that there's a certain dance between capability, regulation, technology, and I think that just because of the nature of the ecosystem and the ability of the regulator to control, and I think that China is a prime place for certain level of autonomy to particularly in the area of robotaxis, to be deployed. I think that even within a country, when you can have a better zoning and designation for areas, I think that's going to provide you with the first opportunities to see the autonomy, and that actually goes back to the questions you raised before. I think that autonomy in some cases looks far, depends on what your imagination or what you think about autonomy. But when we wake up one day and autonomy will be here, okay? It's exactly what's happening with the EV concept. Things looks far, but then they are here. And I think that it's going to be happening first in a mass scale in China and in some other places potentially. But I think United States can have it as well. Maybe in a places by which we'll be able to regulate it better. Not only that, I mean, we can see it also in areas that are not pure, civil mobility, can be under some sorts of related to defense projects, as we see it already now, or maybe agriculture projects and mining and so on and so forth.
Yeah, Luke, if I could just add, we do an annual report at Denton's looking at what's happening around the globe, and Tal's absolutely right. I mean, China is so far ahead. The U.S., because of its technology, is not far behind, but we're not where China is. But we look at the regulatory landscape, testing, liability, data, privacy, telecommunications, and besides China and the United States, I think you have to also look at Germany, Australia. Believe it or not, Hungary is also doing a lot. As Tal knows, there's so much innovation coming out of Israel. But in terms of really the big movers, I would say China's on top, and then I would say the United States. But unlike China, the federal government, not to beat a dead horse, needs to play a much more active role.
Does the fact that China does seem to sort of be emerging as the leader in this space, does that give some level of impetus or motivation to our federal legislators to actually engage more in this subject? Are you seeing that?
Absolutely.
Great.
Luke,
Luke,
please, Ali, go, please.
I was just quickly, I mean, China ate our lunch on EVs. Cautionary tale. Like, we're just now realizing it, like, whoa, they've got the supply chain. They've locked down their own market. They're flooding their own market with their own cars that they're manufacturing in their country, with their supply chain that they've locked down globally. They ate our lunch. Let's not let it happen again.
Yeah, we've even seen that with Toyota in Japan, a neighboring country. Toyota did such a good job in Honda on their supply chain that they beat GM in volume, I understand, in the US in the recent quarter. One thing, just on an academic level, when you look at it, that organization I mentioned in my opening remarks did an evaluation on the country's preparedness for AVs, and I just shared this with you briefly. The first category is policy and legislation. Eric appreciates that one. The next one is technology and innovation. Several of us appreciate that. The next one is infrastructure readiness. And lastly, customer acceptance, which I touched on earlier. So those are the 4 metrics by which this international body is evaluating countries. And I will share the Netherlands, Singapore, and Norway are 1, 2, and 3, and the United States is 4 by that metric. However, to the point that was mentioned here, China, when I talk to the folks that I really trust in town, is the #1 on the list, and part of it is their legislative ability. And I mean this respectfully. There's a perception that their government isn't as concerned about safety as the United States is when you talk to the experts. And I'm not making a judgment there. I'm just making a statement that was shared with me.
Okay. Perfect. Well, before
Look, just to comment on that, I think that it goes hand in hand. You know, it's when you start dipping your hands into something, you become better at it, and the ecosystem of technology, regulation, zoning, whatever needs to be done, supply chain, become better at that. So the advantage that China is getting is maybe starting because of the regulator, but it starts to open gaps in a significant way, just because you get into the details, you get dirty, and that makes you better. And the more you do that, overall the level rises up. So it has a bigger effect than you think.
Excellent. Thank you, Tal. So just to sort of wrap us up before we sort of transition to a little Q&A from our audience, last question for the panel. How's Georgia preparing for an autonomous future, and what role will Georgia companies or international companies doing business in Georgia play in that future? And I know a number of you have touched on this previously during the discussion, but I want to just open that up to the group.
Ali, you might have the best, I'm sorry, Ali, you have a particularly good view on this with your earlier comments. I just wanted to be, anything else?
Go ahead.
No, I mean, look, I think Eric mentioned the 2015 law that allows for, it's very forgiving, very permissive, gold standard in the United States, state law that we have here that allows autonomous vehicle operation. Like, you know, you got to go see Betty at the DMV and get registered, and you got to show your proof of limousine insurance, and that's about the process. And you know, same with platooning, which was a follow-on piece of legislation. So I mean, the regulatory and the legal framework, the chessboard is set. And my understanding from the OEM side is that, you know, Georgia presents some interesting challenges, right? Our terrain, our rainfall. There are challenges for OEMs to move basically out of the desert, right? Out of the flat, hot desert and to go east. But I think that Atlanta and the state of Georgia is on the radar screen as the capability improves. And it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we are, you know, minding our P's and Q's, doing the basics, right? We got to be using 6-inch striping. It needs to be machine readable. We need hash marks at verges and merges so that we can enable safe operation. We need to be able to offer that hard infrastructure, but we also have to be able to offer the digital infrastructure with the principles overarching of interoperability, regional collaboration and sharing, and the highest level of security that we can afford. And I think we're hitting on all those marks.
Yeah, I would call that out too, Ali, just as a little bit of having worked and working with those autonomous vehicle companies in Arizona. Georgia is well positioned, and I would say kudos to our senior leadership across the state in recognizing we're in a great position and we need to be executing on it. I would say the other part of that is understanding how significant public-private partnerships are. Georgia really is beginning to embrace that. And so the time is now.
I just want to give kudos to the governor. I mean, the fact that he announced this electric mobility and innovation alliance, I guess it was within the last week, to really focus on what Georgia's doing with electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles. We've come a long way. And I think things like what Allie's doing at the Ray, I think what's happening at Curiosity Labs, I think the SK battery plant that is here, it's going to open soon. I think it really positions us well. I'm sure many of you saw the article yesterday about Rivian and whether they're potentially looking at a site for their next plant in Southeast Georgia. I think all of that is great. But I will say that we're talking about technology, and we have a lot of policymakers that don't understand technology, and so it really does call upon the private sector and industry to really play an active role in educating policymakers. And as someone who has spent their career in government, I will tell you that we're talking about safety here. And I know we've touched on it, but we need to get the general public more comfortable with this technology when we're talking about autonomous technology, which is why I think the more we could have autonomous shuttles out there for people to see and try and feel and see it's safe. Some of you know I've been a big advocate to put shuttles on the Beltline instead of light rail because it could happen quicker. But I think the other thing that would come out of that is the public would get to see it and embrace it. They talk to their elected officials. And I think that's going to be the biggest impediment, is to get the technology embraced by the public so that we could continue to foster the ecosystem in the state.
Yeah, two quick closing comments. One is Eric is spot on. So there was an idea, but it didn't happen due to just changes in government. But for North Avenue, from Ponce City Market to Georgia Tech, to have a completely autonomous shuttle going back and forth, which would have been a great way to feel and touch this technology as part of consumer acceptance. Hopefully that will be brought back later. And then the second piece that we just have to mention is the insurance companies don't know exactly how to handle this. And when I was with some very influential politicians, I want to acknowledge this was a few years ago, and they were at a very big think tank. They actually said the biggest laggard is going to be how insurance company models this before the policy and legislation, because that would actually help shape the policy. So I mentioned that to say we should not affect the insurance, underestimate the insurance company complications here.
The only thing I would add to that is that you're seeing a lot of traditional and new form OEMs that are looking to self-insure at this point. The autonomous fleets, they're not going to go to outside third party, they're going to self-insure. And so that obstacle is not near as big as one would have thought several years ago. Which is great innovation, right? Just within a few years, that's huge. It makes sense, especially since we have so many here, right?
Do you think that the insurance companies will be proponents for the technology, because with all the sensor technology and the ability to sort of take the human control out of it, presumably the accident rate should decline, major accidents should decline, right? So they're like having to fund claims should go down for the insurance companies in a lot of ways, I would assume. But there's no doubt, I mean, the most recent NHTSA study said 94% of all accidents are human error. So you take that into consideration, and if we can get to, I mean, it's the 4 nines. If you can get to the 99.999% and driving down that number, yes, the sensors and all the technology advancements that are on the vehicle are more expensive to repair and maintain. But also, if you're able to drive that safety number up and have decrease accidents down, insurance will fall with it.
Great. All right.
Hey, Luke, can I just raise one quick point?
Please.
One thing that we haven't talked about, we've talked about social acceptance, but we haven't talked about accessibility and equity. And whether you're talking about electric, connected, or autonomous vehicles, we need to start having innovative conversations, ideas, concepts, business plans around leasing or car sharing, other supplements to micromobility and to mobility as a service. because you're going to have the haves and have-nots repeated when it comes to, clean mobility and smart, safer mobility. And we're still a little bit ahead of this, so we have time, maybe 5 minutes or 10 minutes, but we have time to think about, business models and what kinds of guardrails we can put into place in order to foster accessibility and equity in this new advanced mobility area as well.
Great. I see a couple of questions coming in on the chat. I know we're close to time. Hopefully we can sort of bleed over, answer some of the questions, and then break out into the virtual networking portion. The first question I see in the chat comes from Bob Dow. I see the large amount of funding for infrastructure as being a major obstacle. What is the plan to start getting buy-in to raise that money? So I assume that's probably more a government-oriented question and a tax-oriented question. I know a number of you have spoken to this, but Eric, do you want to field that one?
Well, I'm not sure I completely understand the question. Is it related to the infrastructure money that the federal government's talking about deploying to the states? Or is it about, I think there's going to be lots of opportunity to tap into infrastructure funding. And, we'll know hopefully in the next few days whether this bill that they're talking about in Washington happens, which is, could be $1.2 trillion over the next 8 years for infrastructure funding. And that is going to, be deployed to the states, and the states can use it in a variety of ways. And I think some of that money can be used for some of the things we've just been talking about as it relates to infrastructure related to AVs.
There were a couple of comments earlier about the gas tax, and the gas tax used to fund roads, at least at the local level, right, across the state of Georgia. If the gas tax is not the solution in an autonomous future, what do you see as being the right funding mechanism, the right revenue model for the states to raise the money to build out that infrastructure?
Yeah, that's an issue that's being debated right now. Some people, talk about basing it on mileage, regardless of what car you're in. But it's debatable. But they need to come up with some funding source, because the gas tax, as I mentioned earlier, is not going to be something that's sustainable, especially as we continue to move towards electric vehicles.
Great.
Yeah, Luke, we have an opportunity to make an informed pivot right now with transportation funding to achieve sufficiency and to achieve consistency. A lot of people favor the road usage charge because it's based on usage, so user pays. I think getting a little bit deeper into the details, though, you start to uncover some equity issues, right? Because folks who, can't afford to live in job centers, who have to commute in for their jobs, they perhaps might be paying more in road usage charge simply because of other societal conditions within which, they live and work, and which they're trying to emerge from, right? So we need to make sure that transportation policy moves people forward, doesn't hold people back. I think everyone agrees that transportation is ultimately economic development, and not just economic development for a city, state, but also this is pathways to, higher qualities of life for our people living in communities. Transportation is ultimately pathway for people being self-sufficient and finding their way into, some degree of moving families and moving generations forward. And we don't want transportation to hold people back from those things. So we just need to make sure that, the devil's in the details with transportation funding, and we don't want to pivot from, one ill-conceived, sort of traditional stuck in the mud model, right? We want to emerge into one that's future forward and that opens up equity and opportunity for everyone.
I so agree with you, Ali, very much. And I wanted to add one more wild card here. The electrical grid isn't designed in the residential infrastructure to support the amount of EV charging that may take place. And maybe if that becomes a new fuel, I'm speaking individually, just throwing an idea out there. Maybe there needs to be a look at, if it's charging a vehicle, there's some sort of tax on that person's bill to help offset some of the fuel tax, in addition to mileage, is one other path. But we need to keep in mind the electrical infrastructure actually is a little bit at risk of the residential environments here. Can't handle it.
And some of this infrastructure money from Washington can go towards building out the infrastructure.
Hey, Luke, I'd like to step in. I'm just being aware of time. I know one of our panelists has to leave, and I'd like to thank them all for just a fantastic panel. There's been so much information. And for any of the attendees who have to leave, I understand we're just past 1. We're going to go into breakout rooms, and hopefully we'll have a panelist in each breakout room and some of the board members, and continue this discussion for those who want to. But like I say, this has just been a really fantastic panel. I want to thank you on behalf of the TAG International Business Society. We have our big signature events in October, so if you're interested, please follow that, where Georgia leads, and we'll have some new events coming up shortly. And with that, we'll head out to breakouts.